Hello and welcome to my VBA and Excel training channel. Today I have a simple video that's going to walk you through on how to complete a reconciliation process, which is merely comparing two different data sources and data points against each other to determine if there's any differences or discrepancies. So this is going to be geared toward the beginner level for VBA users, and there's not going to be a whole lot of code to it. I've left out the complex code to kind of get the two data sources kind of at this combined look within a single sheet. That could be perhaps a video for a different day, but I still think there's value in walking through the steps required for this reconciliation. So let's get started. Alright, in yellow here we have source 1 and its respective data below it, and source 2 with data below it, and we're looking at approximately just under 300 rows. So as part of that data we have apples and we have some numbers associated with those apples, and then over here we have apples and some more numbers. So theoretically we want these two sources, they should tie out or they should match each other. What we're going to do is determine if they don't and at which exact row they don't, so we can potentially research further if needed. So as we scroll down, keep scrolling, we have apples and a bunch of numbers, and then ultimately, just for fun, it does switch over to oranges just to kind of give you a slightly different look. But that's not necessarily that important. The important part we're going to be looking at are the numbers within the two sources. And here we have a column, difference 1 and difference 2. One's going to display a difference when comparing this column to this column, and difference 2 will show the difference when comparing this column to this column. So in theory we should see either a 0 or a dash to represent a 0, and that's a good thing. And if we don't, then it's going to display the exact difference between the two. So let's hop over to the code within VBA. Your shortcut is hitting Alt F11 to launch VBA in Excel. And here I've already typed out the code to save some time. So I have gone to Insert, Module, and here I've named the module as Find Diffs or differences. So within there, kicking it off by clearing the contents of this specific range. So that's I3 to J 50,000. Just essentially that's these two columns, and I'm going to row 50,000 just to get some kind of number, some extremely high number past my specific rows, which as we said was just a little under 300. So you can certainly bump that up as needed, but that's more than sufficient for this demonstration. And here we're going to classify x as a variable, and we're going to make it equal to 1, and then we're going to jump into a do loop. So this loop is going to run until range results dot offset x comma 0 is equal to blank. So what does that mean? If we hop back over to Excel, we will see in A2 up here I've named it results. So that is a named range as part of cell A2, calling that results, and then the offset is any kind of coordinates, x this number or x equal to row, and 0 the column. So 0 meaning we're going to stay in the same column as where results is. X will change due to it being our variable that we've set. And skipping down, we're going to be increasing x incrementally by 1. And we'll get to that in here in just a second. So what are we going to be doing as part of this reconciliation? So I want to spit out a result in columns I and J and essentially calculate the difference. Pretty simple. I mean, it's really just or just a subtraction formula, just a kind of maybe complicated subtraction formula, but it's really not terribly challenging. So this is a smart, we'll call it a smart calculation that'll provide some automation, and also as our data changes, it will be able to change with the data as opposed to having to make some modifications down the road. So range results dot offset x comma 8. So we're going 8 columns over from results. Results was essentially in column A. So if we slide over 8 columns, that's going to place us in column I. And just for comparison, this is almost identical code except for column 9 from results, so that's just going to place us one more column over in the diff2 column, or column J. So going back up here, what are we going to be doing? We're going to take a rounded number. In this case, you don't have to round it, but that's what I've done for this particular example. And we're going to well, the reason I rounded it is because some of them came out to multiple decimal points and they weren't exact matches. So I didn't want to leave a difference of 0.01 or something rather insignificant. By rounding it, I'm able to eliminate that. So I'm rounding essentially x comma 2, and this 2 is representative of how many decimal points it's being rounded to. So column 2, or 2 columns over from results, so 1, 2, we're looking at this column for that particular code, and we're going to subtract this column or this value from that value. And in this case, we're looking at essentially this very similar code, but now we're looking at column 6. We're rounding this value as well, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we're looking at this column. So like I mentioned before, we're going to be comparing this data to this data and getting our difference here, and that's essentially our code across this. So we can call that, I've labeled that as cost, and the next one labeled as units. So in this one, as we mentioned, that's pointing to the diff2 column, column J, and here that particular cell, as it works its way down, is going to be equal to this value minus this value. And you can take a screen print of this, you can pause the video to kind of write that code down or look at it if you need to, but essentially all we're doing is moving over one more column, looking at this data and looking at this data in those respective columns, and then the macro is going to spit out a difference in our difference too. So very simple, but the overall objective here is to help you understand how to set this up and again, build the automation and for that accuracy and something that's very efficient when comparing two data sources. So as we work our way down, you can kind of eyeball it and see that a lot of it's very similar, and that's what makes it challenging. Is when you're looking at this much data, you don't want to spend your time scrolling up and down, comparing stuff left and right. It's too difficult for the human eye to be able to see that if there's a difference or not. So by building the code, if we go back to VBA, it's again very simple, but it was part of this do loop here, this entire loop. Like I mentioned before, we're going to be increasing x by 1. So x is representative of our rows. So it's starting out in row 1 as x is equal to 1 from the results named range. So this is truly row 1 based on that named range, not row 1 within the spreadsheet, but based on that range. So as x is equal to 1, this is our starting point. X is equal to 2, it's going to look at this row. X is equal to 3, and so on. So the code simply states do until x comma 0 is equal to blank. So that is going to work its way down this column all the way down. Once it gets to here, x is going to be, or that particular back here, do until this range is going to be blank at this exact point within the data. At that point, we'll be done executing the macro. So let's go ahead and execute it and talk about the results. So here's the results columns. We're going to see those populate. By assigning the macro, I can right click on this button that I've created, select assign macro, and within there I can select my macro that I've created over here, which is find diffs. So I've assigned that to it and select it, and you can see there's a bunch of dashes or hyphens, and those appear in our formula bar. You'll see a 0. So all these are zeros, which again, hypothetically or theoretically, that's what we want. Our goal here is to find out if there are any differences, but we hope there's not. So as I scroll down, immediately, very easy to tell that there's a difference in this particular row. And as you compare the data from side to side, from source to source, you can clearly see that it's there. It's just when it's that much data and you're scrolling down prior to executing the macro, that's very difficult for the human eye to catch. So this macro easily identifies that difference. Keep scrolling, keep scrolling. Oh, there's another difference. Very easy to tell. It jumps out. And of course, you can see when you compare the data, there clearly is a difference there. Keep scrolling down. And that's it. We're at the bottom of our data. We have 2 differences. If we're hoping for 0 differences, then that's not too bad. Only a couple to research out of a little less than 300. But that is the general automation of a reconciliation process between 2 sources, or if you don't necessarily have 2 sources, just between a couple of columns or 4 columns in this case. And there's not a lot of code required behind it. Really just some simple math. But the nice thing about this code is that it's going to work whether there's 100 rows or 200 rows or 2,000 rows, and you don't have to modify any formulas that you've typed out over here in these columns, or move them around or drag them down. All that's built into the code and subsequently in this button. So as your data changes, you don't have to update your code, which is great and very simple and very efficient. So that's about all I wanted to show you today. Feel free to like this video and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I hope this was helpful. Check out some of my other videos, and I will see you later. Thanks.